The 5 columns of dust which had been moving across the Libyan desert began to converge on each other as the blazing heat of noon started to bring a haze which made visibility from the air more difficult. Finally, the 5 clouds merged into one, and there it halted and the dust began to settle. Beneath that thinning cloud were 5 30 CWT lorries, each with 3 or 4 men aboard. On the bonnet of each truck was painted a name. One was Tiger Tim, another Rose Marie, a third was Bouncing Bertha, the fourth was Trouble for Rommell, while the fifth had a different style of name, simply the Fighting Four. The driver of that truck was a lean, tough-looking sergeant named Ted Harris. The wireless man who began to set up his aerial the moment the lorry halted was a 21-year-old soldier named Sam Foster. He was tall, slim and fair-haired, and had a rather slow manner of speech. Dropping off the truck when he had lit a cigarette was Curly Bates, a chunkily built Yorkshireman who had got his nickname of Curly from the fact that he was almost bald. Following him, a twinkle in his blue eyes, came China Brown. China loved a practical joke and was apt to scare those who did not know his habit of carrying a hand grenade in each pocket. In a matter of minutes, Sam rigged the aerial and began to send out the long-range Desert Group's call sign to their desert headquarters at Kufra, some hundreds of miles away to the southeast. While he was trying to contact base, the officer in charge, Major Corey, was consulting maps with the patrol navigator, who was checking their position with the sun compass. Other members of the patrol were already at work, lighting a fire for the midday brew, while others were resting. Some minutes went by before Sam was able to contact Kufra, and then he began to jot down the coded message coming over the air. When he had finished, he handed the flimsy to Major Corey, who took a cipher book to one side to decode the message. The tea had been brewed, and the patrol were enjoying their midday snack when Major Corey came across, a sheet of paper in his right hand. Corey was tall, lean, deeply tanned and always smiling. He was well known to Rommell's men for the many daring exploits he had carried out behind enemy lines, and this patrol was on its way out for a refit and a rest. "Listen, men," Major Corey said. "This is going to shake you. We're not going out immediately. Yes, I know, we've taken a bashing during the past 4 weeks. We've worked hard, mapping routes, but HQ is giving us a chance to be in on a job that I think you're going to like. I am going to like it. Anyone heard of the SAS? The sun-tanned men, half of them sporting beards, looked up. Some had heard vague whispers of the newly formed SAS, but no one really knew what it was. I'll save time and explain, the Major said. SAS stands for Special Air Service. It was originally planned for small groups of men to be dropped behind Rommel's lines, to bust up his airfields and so on. A tough job, for which the motto "Who dares wins" is rather suitable. Only the most daring men get into the SAS. "We should be all right for it then, sir," China Brown suggested. "Don't we dare, when we come out to do the jobs we do?" "Yes, we do," Major Corey agreed. "Only our work, dangerous enough at times, is more for reconnoitring routes, watching enemy transport movements so they'll know in Alexandria what Jerry is up to. The SAS do different things. Anyway, this is what Kufra want us to do. Instead of running into base, it shouldn't hold us up more than 36 hours. Towards sunset, we'll join up with a group of SAS men with jeeps. Our job is to escort them onto an airfield on the coast. It's the one about 15 miles from here. You all know it. Our little job is to lead the jeeps onto the airfield, then stand by while they get on with the job." He paused, and Sergeant Harris broke the silence with, "Did you say lead them on to the airfield, sir? Actually onto the airfield?" "Actually onto the airfield," Major Corey agreed, smiling. "Let me tell you some of the things they've already done. To date, I think they have destroyed something like 150 Jerry planes, blown up 30-odd petrol tankers, shot up numerous road halts. You know what I mean, the rest houses where enemy drivers can get a meal and a bed. They are making Rommel's men scared of driving at night, which is, of course, helping the war effort quite a lot." He paused for a moment or so, then went on. "On the airfield we're going to visit, there are 60 or more planes. Junkers 52, the big troop carriers, Messerschmitt fighters, Henkels, Stuka dive bombers and some Italian machines. If the raid goes according to plan, we should clean up the whole field before dawn." Men looked at one another, eyebrows raised. It sounded good, if it came off. If Jerry lets us drive on to an airfield, same as the Major says, you could call me Aunt Fatty for the rest of my life, China murmured. You'd think he didn't know anything about defence or about posted sentries and... Any questions, Major Corey asked. We aren't going to take all the trucks, are we, sir? Sergeant Harris asked. I mean, is it wise to risk the wireless? If we lost that, we'd lose contact and... No, I ought to have explained. We'll take only 2 trucks. The SAS will drive down the road in 2 columns, a long-range desert truck leading each. When we reach the airfield, we take up position on each side of the entrance. Here the Major's eyes gleamed and a smile creased his lips. All we have to do is keep the door open so the SAS can get out, and pick up survivors in case the enemy open up and hit any of the jeeps. That clear to everyone? F, Curly Bates growled, rolling a cigarette and carefully licking the paper. Jerry isn't a cuckoo. I can see lots of old iron flying about tomorrow and we'll be in the thick of it. Who thinks up these crazy ideas? Sergeant Harris turned to him and in a fierce whisper asked, So you don't want to come with us? Before Curly could protest that he had not meant what he had said, Major Corey asked, I shall want 3 volunteers for each of the 2 trucks, and before anybody starts sticking their neck out, listen, the SAS may get away with this surprise attack. Running right onto an airfield has never been attempted before. Earlier attacks on targets like this have been done on foot, driving to within a mile or so, then creeping onto the airfield and planting time bombs. Then they either crept off again or had a bit of a spree by shooting up the mess or the sleeping quarters. They're hoping to drive onto the airfield and off again before the defenders get over their surprise. If they don't, then there will be casualties, and our 2 trucks have the job of collecting any men who have lost their vehicles, and if need be, fighting a rearguard action to let the SAS force get clear. It could be sticky. I want single men only to volunteer. 8 hands went up, and among them was China Brown's and the hand of Curly Bates. Sam Foster did not volunteer. He knew he would not be selected, for he was a star radio operator. Leave this to me, Ted Harris said, getting to his feet and moving across to the Major. There followed a low-voiced conversation while the volunteers waited anxiously. Think he'll manage to get us in on it? Curly Bates asked, chewing the end of a match. He's always saying he's right up the Major's cuff. This'll show if he's just been shooting a light or not. China merely grunted. However, when Sergeant Harris came back to take his place on the hot sand, he gave his 2 friends a wink and they grinned. They knew even before Major Corey announced who his volunteers were that they were in. The patrol moved on shortly afterwards and finished their day in a wadi, some 7 miles from the coast road. Twice they had halted as aircraft flew overhead. If they were found and attacked now, it could easily mean the end of the raid before it began. For though the SAS were going to hit the enemy, it was the men of the long-range desert group who knew the way. There was difficult ground between them and the coast road, ground which had been gone over slowly and painfully by the LRDG trucks in the months before. An hour from sunset, there was a cloud of dust on the horizon to the southeast. As the sun dropped behind the low escarpment which lay between them and the coast road, the SAS convoy arrived. Long-range desert group men and SAS men exchanged greetings and eyed one another. In a way they all bore the same stamp, burned brown by the desert sun, hardened by journeys of thousands of miles over blistering sand, with the minimum of water. They always had good rations, but water was always short. Colonel Pomfret, known to his men as Pom Pom, was leader of this SAS raid, and he outlined again what was to happen. Then, when the last light of the day had gone and the stars were shining down from a cloudless sky, engines came to life. China Brown sat beside Sergeant Harris. In each pocket he had a hand grenade. In the dashboard pocket there were more hand grenades, and there was a box of them at his feet. China was an expert with grenades. He could throw them with the accuracy of a champion darts thrower, and he handled them as a boy handles a pet mouse, lovingly and carefully. Curly Bates was in the back of the lorry, with the twin Vickers guns. He had his ammunition stowed away under dust sheets. The guns had been taken apart and wiped clean of any possible grains of sand which might cause a jam. The mechanism was protected now with clean rags, in addition to the official covers provided. It was the bald-headed Yorkshireman's boast that he could shoot the ash off anybody's cigarette at 30 yards and not even disturb the cigarette. No one had ever taken him up on it, though all agreed that he was an amazingly expert marksman. The trouble was, as China had pointed out, if Curly did make a mistake, The bloke wouldn't be worrying about a spoiled cigarette, he would probably be dead. It was midnight when they cleared the escarpment and halted within 300 yards of the coast road. Colonel Pomfret called his men together and gave them a last word of warning. "We shall almost certainly pass some enemy traffic on the road. Wave to them, but if anybody shoots, I'll skin them alive afterwards with a blunt penknife. Get it? I don't care how tempting the target is. We're going to shoot up an airfield, not road traffic. Any questions? None? Right, we'll go. Major Corey, if you'll lead the way, we shall be most obliged." There were grins in the darkness. Even the men of the LRDG were beginning to think this pom-pom bloke was the right sort. Within minutes of hitting the coast road, they passed a small German convoy. There were waves and shouts from both sides, with no one among the enemy even vaguely suspecting that they had just passed a dangerous foe. "Strike a light," China Brown murmured when they passed another convoy. "Just shows, Sarge, what cheek can do, don't it? If those Jerrys thought—" "Never mind the Jerrys," Ted Horace said, peering into the darkness ahead. "Just keep your mind on the job and your eyes on the road." They went on for another 6 miles, and then ahead of them and slightly to the left there was a sudden blaze of light which seemed to turn the night into day. They had arrived. The landing strip was lit up to allow a Junkers 52 to come in to land. The 2 LRDG trucks drove on for another 100 yards, then pulled to one side to allow the SAS jeeps to go forward. Guns were cocked. Major Corey waited until the last jeep had passed, then he swung his lorry near to the one driven by Horace. "Once they are into the airfield, Sergeant, we'll drive just past the gates and turn around, ready to move off when they've finished, okay?" "Okay, sir." The Major and his 2 men, Sergeant Horace and his friends, China and Curly, watched and waited. The landing lights showed aircraft of half a dozen kinds parked side by side along the strip. There was a wire fence all around, and a gate manned by sentries. They could see the sentries start to walk out as the first jeep drew near. The roar of the engines was drowned by the thunder of the Junkers, which was down now, and the pilot clearing his exhaust ports with revving up bursts on alternate engines. No one heard the crack as the sentry fired, and was shot down before he could fire a second shot. Then the jeeps were racing onto the airfield. The cold, calculated courage of the SAS men made the scalp of even such a tough, seasoned soldier as Sergeant Horace tingle, and the fine hairs on his neck prickled as he waited for the first sweeping blasts of machine gun fire from the airfield defence posts. The thunder of the Junkers engines faded to silence, and now the roar of the jeep engines could be heard. The vehicles looked quite small as they raced steadily on, exactly halfway between the rows of parked planes. "What are they waiting for?" China murmured. "I thought they— A single shot, and it was a tracer bullet, went like a live spark across in the direction of a Hankel. At once the night was hideous with the snarling crackle of heavy machine gun fire. There were more than the usual number of tracers in the Vickers belts for this job, and within 20 seconds of the firing commencing, the first aircraft suddenly erupted in a mushrooming balloon of smoke and flame. For the space of perhaps 2 minutes, it seemed as though the airfield staff were too stunned by what was happening to do anything. Then the landing lights were switched off. By now, however, 3 aircraft were flaming madly, and no other lights were needed, though the headlights of the leading jeeps were switched on so they could avoid potholes or badly repaired bomb craters. "They're going to get away with it, Sarge," China muttered. "I didn't think they— Oh, I always did open my mouth too soon. This is where the trouble begins." There was a light anti-aircraft tower at the far end of the landing strip, and the gun crew had been working frantically to get their weapon turned from pointing skywards to pointing down. There was a flash, and the first shell screeched just over the 2 waiting trucks. "That's one for the deep blue sea," Ted Horace murmured. "I hope they either shorten their range a lot more, or—" There he stopped, for there was another flash from the tower, and this time a shell exploded just inside the airfield wire, throwing up a column of sand and smoke. There were no more shots from that gun. One of the jeeps ceased firing at the parked aircraft for a few moments. A long burst at the anti-aircraft platform put the gun's crew out of action. In the light of the burning aircraft, it was now possible to see small figures at the far end of the strip, running to man defence posts. They had been caught napping, but had got over their first-minute panic. Some got to their guns, others crumpled like rag dolls and fell, to lie where they had fallen. This was war with no quarter asked or given. A mortar opened fire, and with its first shell scored a direct hit on one of the second rank of jeeps. There was a flash as the jeep seemed to leap into the air, with men tumbling out to lie still. First British casualties. A Breda gun began a slow beat. Flash, flash, flash. Then both it and the mortar were silenced. 4 jeeps switched their fire from aircraft to defenders, and that was that. The last shot from the Breda, however, scored a bull, and a second jeep was out of action. The crew leapt onto another jeep. One man, apparently wounded, was grabbed and hauled aboard with an efficiency which made Ted Harris, China and Curly raise their eyebrows in silent admiration. These SAS blokes were no slow coaches. Then the jeeps reached the far end of the strip. Each column turned on itself and started the race back to the entrance and the coast road. If they could get out now, they would have beaten up the airfield and be on their way back to the desert in a raid which would have lasted less than 20 minutes. The guns were still pumping bullets into aircraft. Many were blazing. Others had escaped for the time being. It was a sight to enthrall, and it was only by chance that Curly Bates, his fingers on his own gun trips, chanced to look backwards. Why he did it, he never knew, but he gave a yelp of surprise, then bawled, "Cor, Ted, look behind! Tanks!" Sergeant Ted Harris stood up and looked back over the lorry. The brilliant orange glow from the burning aircraft lit up the road to the west and outlined what looked like a small convoy of light tanks. They were the German equivalent of the early British Whippet tanks and could clatter along at 20 miles an hour. They were coming at full speed now. If they got to the gates before the SAS jeeps got out, there would be little chance of any of the raiders getting away. It was the worst possible luck that this convoy should have been nearing the airfield when the raid began. "Sir," Ted Harris yelled, "behind! Light tanks!" Major Corey shot a quick glance up the road, then looked at the approaching jeeps. The tanks were going to win the race and close the gap. He waved a hand towards the tanks and shouted, "See if you can hold them off, Sergeant." For a moment even Ted Harris looked startled. Then the discipline of years in the army came to his aid. He whipped a hand up to his forehead in what he was sure would be his last salute, and bellowed, "Yes, sir."